Another edition of Behind the Lines presented by BetMGM Sportsbook and TheLines.com. I'm Eli Hershkovich, joined as always by Christian Cipollini, trading manager for BetMGM. Christian, over the last couple of weeks, NFL favorites are covering at nearly a 73% clip as we discuss weekly. It's not only a net negative for me, but also a net negative for BetMGM, but the public has certainly profited over these last 2 weeks in Week 16 and Week 17 respectively, and that includes Washington Sunday Night Football overtime win and cover over the Atlanta Falcons, trailing by double digits at half. Washington now the sixth favorite to cover the point spread in overtime this season, the most in this century, so over the last 24 seasons or so. How big of a hit in particular in Week 17, or if we want to just take a look at the last couple weeks, has BetMGM taken?
Yeah, I would say that the books are very thankful for same-game parlays because outside of that, this would have been a very, very devastating couple weeks. As you mentioned, favorites have been covering at a crazy rate. It must just be the fact of this season. This feels pretty top-heavy, where there's a lot of good teams at the top and then a lot of very bad teams at the bottom, because it has certainly been problems of just nonstop favorites covering. We've had plenty of these big favorite leg parlays that have all hit. So yeah, it's certainly not been fun outcomes from the book's perspective.
And definitely not a fun outcome on Sunday night for the Falcons. No idea if they knew they had timeouts left on the board, leaving Young Goiku with a pretty long field goal attempt. Missed it. Washington goes on and not only wins, but as I mentioned, covers. Pretty absurd. If you go back to week one, the Rams were covering late and Detroit winds up cashing in ATS in overtime, and it's continued on ever since throughout the season. But staying in the NFC, Christian, Minnesota, the Vikings have a chance to get the number one seed in the NFC playoff picture. But if we go back to the preseason, their win total was a juiced 6.5, and now sitting at 14-2 with a chance to clinch the division against the Lions. But Minnesota, an underdog to Detroit at Ford Field on Sunday night in Week 18. The Lions favored by roughly a field goal. We'll see where this number closes, but I assume, barring an injury, it's going to be around Detroit -2.5, -3. So you look at Super Bowl first for the Vikings. If we look at the futures market, just because Minnesota is one of the hottest teams in the NFL, not only just the NFC, but across the league, sixth shortest odds to win the Super Bowl at BetMGM, priced right around +900. What's the liability like on Minnesota to win the whole thing, just considering they were 80-1 or right around that number long shot entering the season?
Yeah, we're still very much okay on them. As much as a 14-2 record shows, there's definitely a lot of doubt that still is around this team, even though they looked fantastic last night. They've looked fantastic for a good amount of the season. So we are very much okay with them. They're one of our least bet of our teams that we give a chance to win the Super Bowl at this point. So definitely one we'll like. We'll actually really want them to win next week against the Lions, because we'll definitely have Lions bets throughout the week, as we do most weeks. And then knocking them out of the one seed would be much better for us, because Lions are our biggest liability. So if the Vikings can win next week, it would be a double whammy for us.
Vikings head coach Kevin O'Connell, the odds-on favorite, and then some, -1,000 priced at that number at BetMGM to win Coach of the Year. And another market, individual player-wise, that a Vikings not only coach, but players involved in is Sam Darnold, Vikings quarterback, +230 to win Comeback Player of the Year, second shortest odds behind Joe Burrow, who has had a record-breaking season for Cincinnati, -400. But if we go back to the AP guidelines that were stated earlier in the season for the Comeback Player of the Year award, it is defined literally as the spirit of the AP Comeback Player of the Year award is to honor a player who has demonstrated resilience in a face of adversity by overcoming illness, physical injury, or other circumstances that have led him to miss playing time the previous season. Darnold backed up Brock Purdy last year in San Francisco, but not injury or illness related, yet he has a relatively decent chance. Burrow still the odds-on favorite, but Darnold is still very much in the thick of things to win Comeback Player of the Year, especially if the Vikings pull off the upset in Detroit on Sunday night and the Bengals miss the playoffs and maybe lose in balloonish fashion in Pittsburgh on Saturday night, a game we'll get to here in a bit. But define it from the book standpoint, because I'm sure a lot of bettors, if they read those guidelines, are saying, why is Darnold even in the conversation at this point?
Yeah, so definitely a pretty fascinating topic that we'll go throughout this last week because we have reached out, we've figured out everything that we can, and we have been told he is not eligible to win the award. But he is still listed there on the odds. While he is not eligible, he still could win the award because the voters could just completely ignore those rules. It's not like they're going to have a ballot that isn't going to have his name on it. They're going to be able to write in whoever they want. So if they want to write in Sam Darnold, and we have been following that there are a good amount of voters out there that so far have said they're going to vote for Darnold regardless of them saying he's not eligible for this award. So it does feel like he's going to get a good amount of votes. I'd say the odds are where they are because you'd also imagine there's going to be a lot of voters that aren't going to vote him at all because he's not eligible and they don't want to potentially lose their vote or whatever it may be. But he is certainly going to get some votes despite being not eligible for this award.
If you have any inside scoops, be sure to not send it BetMGM's way. But one more individual market to go over, Christian, looking at MVP Josh Allen up to minus 300, a little bit bigger of a favorite going back to the odds we discussed last week, Lamar Jackson plus 240. So given that Allen is a bigger favorite this week, I'm assuming BetMGM still taking some Jackson bets at plus 240 with the numbers really leaning towards Jackson at this point, even though the market says Allen. Still an okay result for Allen to win the award?
Yeah, Book, we desperately want Allen to still win this. Every other outcome, Lamar being the most realistic next outcome is a loser for the book. Saquon would be a loser. Any other option is a loser. So the book desperately wants us to keep Josh Allen. We end up with another standalone Lamar game where he's a 17-point favorite. So that's not going to be good for us because as we know, those standalone games do just end up having more weight. And both of these players also aren't in contention for the 1 seed, which we've seen in the past to be significant towards this. So I definitely think it's still a little bit more in the air than maybe the odds currently suggest. We'll see how it shakes up, but the book certainly wants it to be Josh Allen, and it is priced as if this is still his year.
And you touched on it with the Ravens point spread, so let's dig a little bit deeper. Baltimore could have the biggest point spread in franchise history on their side on Saturday afternoon against the really, really putrid Cleveland Browns, to say the least. Right now, minus 17.5 is the point spread in Baltimore's direction. Total of 42. And if we go back to 2019, the Ravens were minus 17 against the Jets. They won that game by 21. Not that that result is indicative of Baltimore covering this point spread, but they also beat the Giants in Week 15 by 21 points as 16.5 point favorites on the pregame closing number. It's a win, and you clinch the AFC North Division title if you're Baltimore. And at some shops, I don't necessarily think this was the case at BetMGM, but some books had this line as high as Baltimore minus 18.5 over the last 24 hours or so. And the last time we saw an 18-point spread at least was dating back to 2020 when the Cardinals were minus 18 against the Texans, and Arizona won that one by 26 points for some scoregami. So if you had to look ahead a little bit here over the next 5 days or so, how high do you expect this number to get?
So it starts getting interesting as you get way up into these numbers because the difference between 17, 18, 19, is once you get to 17.5, the difference between those numbers is not much at this point. The farther you go away, the less those numbers in between matter. So I feel like we're probably going to end up here at 17.5, but it wouldn't surprise me to move all the way to 20.5 just off the fact of if it does tend to move, if there's some sort of Brown player that isn't playing, something like that, it's going to move by a decent amount just off the fact that at this point it's 17 or 21 or 24 is basically the next numbers that we start looking for at that point. I don't think we're going to end up getting that high. It is a weird scheduling quirk here that they end up being a standalone game on a Saturday where the Ravens do need to win. They can't scoreboard watch anywhere else. They basically just got to make sure to take care of business and win. But yeah, I think we're going to end up around here. But as you mentioned, there are 18s around there, so it could keep climbing a little.
Yeah, not to pat ourselves on the back or anything, but we did mention Ravens to win the AFC North last week at plus money. So just saying is all I'm saying. But on to Cincinnati, not to quote Bill Belichick, but looking at the Bengals Steelers spread in Pittsburgh, with the Steelers having an outside shot of winning the AFC North if somehow the Browns pull off a road upset, which wouldn't be in their favor if they want to look to improve their draft position here in week 18. But Pittsburgh is a 2.5-point home dog to a Bengals team that has a shot to make the playoffs if they win this game and the Denver Broncos lose as over a touchdown home favorite to Kansas City, along with Miami losing to the Jets. And I was looking at this parlay scenario, 3-team parlay scenario at BetMGM. A Bengals win, a Jets win, and a Chiefs win is around plus 1,600 for a 3-team moneyline parlay. Have you seen any of those bets at BetMGM so far?
Oh yeah, those have been coming through. There was some from last week coming through of little similar things into that as well. But at this point, it's not looking good for the Bengals, just based off the fact of that game that you touched on. The Broncos are up to 10-point favorites now. It looks like the Chiefs are going to rest starters, and that's really the main one that it hinges off of. Obviously, if they end up winning that game, right now we're putting them at an 84% chance to win that game. If they do, then the other ones end up being meaningless. And then there's also another weird factor too that we just mentioned, the fact that the Ravens playing first. If they win that game, there is a scenario where the Steelers could say, okay, well, we can't win the division anymore. Let's just rest and rest up for next week, giving the Bengals an easy win there. So a lot of few weird things going on. This is the nightmare week for the book.
Absolutely. As you all know by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up with BetMGM yet, use promo code THELINES, that's the lines one word, and you will get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code THELINES. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game. You'll then receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your first bet loses. Just make sure to use bonus code THELINES when you sign up. See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, and 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only, subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire within 7 days. In partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code THELINES and get your $1,500 first bet offer today. And we'll get into a couple more later on where some point spreads could be inflated pre-flop, not just right before kickoff, but over the course of the week. So looking at that potential matchup here or a game where the point spread could be a little bit inflated, Tampa Bay minus 14.5 against the Saints, and the Bucs would clinch the NFC South with a win, but the Falcons, similar to Pittsburgh, maybe a little bit more of a chance than the Steelers, or definitely based on implied probability, have an outside shot to win the NFC South if they are able to take care of the Carolina Panthers as 7.5-point home favorites as of this recording at BetMGM, and a Bucs loss to the Saints. If we go back to a few years ago, if you remember, the Colts were around 2-touchdown road favorites, so a little bit juxtaposition to this matchup with the Bucs being at home, but they lost that game outright to Jacksonville. We do see teams theoretically playing a little bit looser, nothing to play for, a chance to ruin a team's season. In this case, the Saints looking to take the Bucs out of the playoffs. So any interest so far, any underdog takers, maybe even on the money line with New Orleans as a 2-touchdown dog to the Bucs in a huge, huge game for Tampa Bay from a postseason standpoint?
Yeah, I like that you mentioned like this. There is precedent for this to happen. It has happened in the past, and it certainly can happen. As of right now, we haven't seen not much Saints love. Maybe as we get closer, maybe we'll get some more. Just people thinking that maybe there's a chance. I mean, it is a division game too, but as of now, no. But yeah, it's not crazy if the Saints do somehow find a way to win this.
There are some other uncompelling matchups that we could hit on, but among the action that you've seen so far for Week 18, is there any need for the book? I know you mentioned looking ahead for your projection, and your projection is probably spot on that the book will need the Vikings on Sunday night. But does anything stand out so far in terms of the handle for Week 18 as a relatively big need for the book?
No, so I would say actually at this point, the only one that we're going to say is probably the Vikings, just because of what we touched on. It could help us in a lot of different ways if the Vikings do end up winning that game. The rest of these, from our book's perspective, will be very defensive on this week. Our limits are a lot lower, and basically we're looking for the same information that everybody else is. We don't know what certain teams are going to play their starters. Are the Eagles going to try to play? Are they going to try to go for the record? Or, Hurts hasn't played in 2 weeks. Are they going to throw him out for a couple quarters or two and then rest him? All of these things are up in the air, and there's plenty of teams that you could make that argument for. The Rams, Steelers, as we mentioned, and it's kind of all over the place. And there's also players with nagging injuries that, as we get a couple days closer to game time, they might just say, we're not going to play. We're just going to call it on them for the season. So there is so much information that is unknown at this point and out there that for our perspective, we basically want this week to be over, keep limits low, and try to basically get out of this as safe as we possibly can, just because, from a bettor's perspective, this should be a great week if you are able to get on the right side of information, because there could be huge swings in this depending on, what personnel is going to end up out there. I'll also touch on real quickly with that, but we just got word now that Tua is probably not going to play. So there's all these type of things going on. There's going to be tons of injury news, breaking news that is going to come out, and we're just basically going to have to react on what we see.
Wrapping up here, Christian, as you said, lots on the table, unknown for bettors, yourself too. Anything stand out that you may be looking to bet here on the NFL Week 18 slate?
Yeah, so the only ones that I'm going to take is I am going to end up taking the Bengals right now. That's dropped to 1.5. I definitely like that at 1.5. It was already up at 3. I like it just for the fact that I do think the Bengals can win this game outright. They obviously have a lot to play for, and then I do think there's the outside chance of Pittsburgh sees Baltimore winning and just says, okay, we're just going to rest for next week. We don't really care if we get the 4 or the 5 seed. We're just going to rest and go in fresh for next week. So that is the main one that I'm looking at just based off that specific angle. If I were to take another one, I would like the Lions at 2.5. Just because I'm not so sure that will stay at 2.5. So getting 2.5 right now might be worth it to take, just because I do think that's going to end up at 3 by the end of the week. But outside of that, too much unknown. I'm staying away.
Below a key number makes sense, and using intuition for the Bengals pick. So like both of those as well. He is Christian Cipollini, training manager at BetMGM Sportsbook. Remember to check out thelines.com for the best sportsbook promos for BetMGM and all of our NFL Week 18 content, including anytime touchdown bets as the player prop markets at BetMGM get released. So for Christian and for myself, Eli Hershkovich, thanks for watching and listening to this edition of Behind the Lines presented by BetMGM. So long, everybody, and good luck. Good luck, actually, with your NFL Week 18 picks.